Think about this. Billions, literally billions of vehicles have rolled off production lines in the last 300 years. It's just a staggering number.
It really is.
And what's maybe even more mind-bending is that, well, we haven't run out of the stuff to build them. In fact, in many ways, we seem to have access to more resources now. It feels backwards, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And that apparent contradiction, that's pretty much exactly what we're going to explore today.
Okay.
We're taking a deep dive into the Industrial Revolution, but focusing really on its, let's say, its true engine.
Yeah.
This radical change in how humans capture energy, how they convert it, and how they use raw materials.
Right.
Our goal here is to unpack the core ideas from our sources to understand not just what happened, but why it fundamentally shifted human history and continues to shape everything around us.
Absolutely. And whether you're maybe trying to get a handle on the modern economy, or you're just fascinated by these big turning points in history, or heck, maybe you're just curious how seemingly small discoveries can blow up into huge changes, this deep dive is for you.
We're planning to start by sort of picturing the pre-industrial world, looking at the energy limits they faced. Then we'll get into that key breakthrough, turning heat into motion moment.
Exactly. And the explosion of innovations that came after, and then the sort of unexpected consequences socially, economically, like the rise of consumerism and how that changed our view of, well, stuff and even living things. Okay, let's get into it.
Right. So before the Industrial Revolution, human societies were really fundamentally limited by the energy they could get their hands on.
Okay.
Think about it. Wood for fire, wind for sails, water for mills. These were all finite and often, frankly, unreliable.
Yeah, the wind doesn't always blow, rivers aren't always nearby.
Precisely. And imagine a world where the amount of work you could possibly do was directly tied to how much food you and your animals could physically eat. That was basically life before we cracked the code on energy conversion.
And that's a crucial point. You mentioned this inability to easily switch energy types. Wind moves a ship, water grinds grain, but you couldn't easily use wind to, say, smelt iron efficiently.
Exactly. And that's where it gets really interesting. For millennia, the main energy converter wasn't a machine, it was biology.
Us, animals.
Us and animals. Our metabolism, the process of burning food, that's how we generated muscle power. We ate plants, or animals that ate plants. Our bodies broke down that organic fuel, and that energy powered everything we did.
And trace that back far enough, and it all comes from the sun, right? Photosynthesis in plants capturing solar energy.
Absolutely. That's the ultimate source. Plants grab sunlight, store it chemically, and that energy flowed through the entire system. Our history was so tightly bound to those cycles: plant growth, seasons, sunlight.
So less sun, fewer crops, less energy available, slower pace of life.
Right. Food stores would go down, activity slowed. Then good harvests, lots of sun, a burst of energy. Everyone, from farmers to kings, planting wars, was basically running on stored sunlight packaged as food. Which kind of makes you wonder, for thousands of years, wasn't the most important energy invention sort of hiding in plain sight?
Ah, you mean the boiling kettle?
Yeah.
The lid rattling, heat making something move?
Exactly. That simple, everyday thing. It's just amazing that for so long, its massive potential wasn't really recognized. It was maybe just an annoyance if the water boiled over.
Yeah.
But that little jumping lid held the secret to unleashing power on a scale nobody could have imagined. We were surrounded by this potential, just couldn't see how to unlock it.
Incredible.
Now, there was a kind of partial step with gunpowder in China back in the 9th century.
Right, explosives.
Yes, but even then, the idea of using that force to propel things, like in a gun, that was so counterintuitive, took centuries. First, it was mostly firebombs. It was like 600 years between discovering gunpowder and developing really effective cannons.
600 years, that really shows how slow things could be.
It does. And then, amazingly, another 3 whole centuries passed before the next major machine for converting heat into motion appeared. It just underscores how sluggish that kind of innovation could be before things really kicked off.
So what was that next leap?
That happened in Britain around 1700. In the coal mines. See, Britain's population was growing. They'd cut down a lot of forests for fuel, so they turned to coal.
Okay.
But a lot of coal was deep, often below the water table, so the mines kept flooding. It was a huge practical problem. They needed a solution, urgently.
Enter the steam engine.
Exactly. The basic idea. Burn fuel, coal, initially boil water, make steam. The expanding steam pushes a piston, boom, heat converted into movement.
Simple concept, revolutionary outcome.
Although the first ones were incredibly inefficient. They ate up vast amounts of coal just to pump a bit of water.
But they had the coal right there at the mine, so that didn't matter as much at first.
Precisely. The fuel was cheap and abundant right where they needed the pump. But what's really fascinating is how quickly things developed after that initial breakthrough.
How so?
British inventors and entrepreneurs started improving efficiency rapidly. And crucially, they thought beyond just pumping water. They hooked steam engines up to looms, to cotton gins.
Ah, textiles.
Yes, completely revolutionizing textile production. Britain became the workshop of the world, remarkably quickly.
And you mentioned that psychological barrier breaking down. That must have been huge.
Immense. Once people saw coal via steam driving looms, the question just naturally popped up. Okay, if it can do that, what else can it do?
The possibilities suddenly seemed endless.
Exactly. The logic flowed. First, a steam locomotive pulling coal wagons on iron rails, maybe 20 kilometers or so, mine to harbor.
Okay, makes sense.
Then, well, if you can move coal, why not other stuff? And if other stuff, why not people?
The railway age begins.
Right. The Liverpool to Manchester line opening in 1830, that was massive. And just 20 years later, Britain was covered in railway tracks, all powered by steam.
Wow, so that steam engine just lit a fire under everyone, this obsession with conversion.
It really did.
Yeah.
This powerful idea took hold. Give us the right machine, and we can convert any kind of energy for any need, pretty much anywhere.
And the time lag between discovery and application just started shrinking dramatically.
Hugely. Think about it again. Gunpowder, 600 years to decent cannons. Compare that to Einstein's EMC-axis, mass into energy.
Yeah.
From that equation to the atomic bomb and nuclear power plants, only about 40 years.
40? That's an incredible acceleration.
It really shows how the pace just exploded. Then you get the internal combustion engine.
Our planes.
In a single generation, it totally changed transportation.
Yeah.
And it turned petroleum, which was mostly used for waterproofing or lubrication before that, into liquid political power.
It's wild to think that a century earlier, the idea of countries fighting wars over oil would have sounded completely insane.
Utterly absurd. And then there's electricity. Maybe the most amazing transformation of all.
From science experiments to everything.
2 centuries back, it was basically a curiosity parlor tricks. Now, it's like this universal genie powering our lights, computers, phones, factories, everything. Most of us haven't got a clue how it actually works.
Guilty.
But we absolutely cannot imagine life without it.
So stripping it right back, the Industrial Revolution was fundamentally this revolution in energy conversion.
That's the core of it.
And the source material makes this really interesting point. The limit isn't really the amount of energy out there, it's our knowledge, our ability to actually harness it and convert it.
That is such a crucial insight. We often hear fears about running out of energy, fossil fuels drying up. But when you look at the sheer amount of energy constantly hitting the planet, it's astronomical. The total energy in all the fossil fuels combined is actually tiny compared to what the sun delivers every single day, for free.
The numbers are just nuts, aren't they? Something like 3.7 million exajoules a year from the sun. And humans use only about 500.
Exactly. We use in a whole year what the sun delivers in about 90 minutes.
90 minutes, that puts it in perspective.
And that's just solar. We haven't even properly tapped into nuclear on a massive scale or gravitational energy like ocean tides. Before industrialization, we were basically sipping from this limited green energy reservoir plants, capturing maybe 3,000 exajoules a year via photosynthesis.
Right.
Now we realize we're living next to this vast, almost unimaginable ocean of energy, billions and billions of exajoules. The real challenge isn't scarcity, it's just inventing better pumps, better ways to tap into it.
And finding all that cheap energy basically solved the other big problem, right? The scarcity of raw materials.
Yes, it had this huge knock-on effect. Cheap, abundant energy meant we could suddenly get at resources that were previously unreachable. Think Siberian iron ore.
Or transport things vast distances.
Like shipping wool from Australia all the way to mills in Britain, suddenly feasible.
And science chipped into creating new materials entirely.
Definitely. Plastics, for one. And discovering ways to use previously obscure natural materials, like silicon or aluminum.
Ah, the aluminum story is great. Tell that one.
Okay, so aluminum's discovered 1820s. But getting it out of the ore, incredibly difficult, incredibly expensive.
Third in gold.
More expensive than gold. Napoleon III apparently had special aluminum cutlery made, just for his most important guests to show off.
Wow.
Fast forward. Scientists figure out a cheap way to extract it. using electricity, which itself was becoming more available thanks to energy conversion advances. And now, we make something like 30 million tons a year. People wrap sandwiches in disposable aluminum foil.
Try telling Napoleon that.
Exactly. Imagine his face. It's just mind-boggling.
And the source uses that hand cream example too, right? All those chemical names on the label.
Yeah, it's a great illustration. Look at the ingredients list on almost any modern product. Most of those substances were either totally unknown or impossible to produce affordably just a couple of centuries ago. Our material world has expanded dramatically.
Like Fritz Haber pulling nitrogen out of the air.
That's another powerful story. World War I, Germany's blockaded, running out of nitrates for explosives. Haber figures out how to synthesize ammonia from plain air, nitrogen, and hydrogen.
Which kept their war machine going.
Arguably prolonged the war, yes. He got a Nobel Prize for it in chemistry, importantly not peace. He was also involved in developing poison gas, so a very complex figure.
Definitely.
But his work fundamentally shows how science could suddenly provide essential raw materials, almost out of thin air.
So all this energy, all these materials, it didn't just build factories, it completely changed farming too, the second agricultural revolution.
Precisely. You can't separate the two. Industrial methods flooded into agriculture. Tractors replaced muscle power, animal and human.
Cheap energy driving them.
Right. Then artificial fertilizers, pesticides, insecticides, hormones, medicines, all products of the chemical industry, all boosting yields massively.
And getting the food around the world.
Refrigeration, faster ships, eventually planes. Suddenly you could eat Argentinian beef in London or Japanese sushi almost anywhere. Globalization of food.
And the source makes a pretty blunt point about how we started looking at plants and animals differently, mechanized almost.
Yes, it talks about this significant shift. Farm animals started being viewed less as individual creatures and more as, well, biological machines optimized for industrial output.
Factory farming.
Essentially, yes. Mass production facilities designed for efficiency, not necessarily animal welfare.
Yeah.
Their bodies bred for specific traits, faster growth, more milk, more eggs, their lives dictated by production cycles and ultimately corporate profit.
The examples given are quite stark. Hens in tiny cages.
Unable to stretch their wings, nest, do anything natural, or nursing sows and crates so small they literally cannot turn around.
And dairy cows.
Often confined indoors, little space, treated purely as milk production units. The source argues that while their basic physical needs, food, water, maybe shelter might technically be met.
Their subjective experiences ignored.
Almost entirely. Their social needs, their psychological needs, it likely causes immense frustration, stress, discomfort.
The image of chicks on conveyor belts is particularly grim, sorting them, disposing of the unwanted ones.
By the hundreds of millions, apparently. Asphyxiation, shredders, is presented not as active malice, but as a kind of profound indifference driven by the sheer scale and economics of the system.
A comparison is drawn to the slave trade, interestingly. Not about identical cruelty, but about systemic indifference enabling suffering for economic gain.
Exactly. And the point is made that most consumers just don't think about it. They buy the eggs, the milk, the meat, without connecting it to the conditions.
And the irony is, the same science that enables the system is also showing us just how complex these animals are, emotionally and sensorially.
Right. We understand more than ever about animal cognition, their capacity for suffering beyond just physical pain, which leads into that discussion about evolutionary psychology.
Harry Harlow and the monkeys.
Yes, the idea is that needs shaped by evolution in the wild, like bonding, comfort, play, remain deeply ingrained, subjectively important, even if they aren't strictly needed for survival in an artificial industrial setting.
Like the baby monkeys choosing the cloth mother over the wire mother with food.
Precisely. They craved comfort, touch, security more than just calories. It was a powerful demonstration of that innate need for connection.
And those monkeys raised without proper comfort, even if fed, grew up.
Damaged, right?
Deeply disturbed, yeah. Socially inept, emotionally scarred. It really highlights that psychological well-being is crucial, not just keeping the body alive.
And the scale of this in modern agriculture is just immense.
Yes.
Tens of billions of animals alive at any one time. Around 50 billion slaughtered annually for food. It's staggering. And this mechanization, this industrialization of agriculture, is what allowed for the massive increase in food production that supports our current global population and socioeconomic order.
It also freed up the workforce, didn't it? People leaving farms for factories.
Absolutely critical. If everyone still had to farm, the urban industrial revolution couldn't have happened. Think about the U.S. now, maybe 2% of the population farms, yet they produce huge surpluses. That shift, is entirely thanks to agricultural industrialization.
Okay, so we've got unprecedented production of everything, food included. But that creates a new problem, doesn't it? Who's going to buy all this stuff?
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. The modern capitalist economy, as the source describes it, is like a shark. It has to keep moving, keep growing. Constant production is essential.
But you need constant consumption to match it.
Right. You can't just make things. People have to buy them. And so a whole new ethic had to emerge. Consumerism, an ethic that actively encourages buying more, wanting more, replacing things constantly.
Which is such a flip from older values. Frugality used to be a virtue, right? Like the Puritan Spartans.
Absolutely. Thrift, making things last, avoiding extravagance, those were praised. Consumerism turns that on its head. Frugality becomes almost suspect. Self-deprivation.
The source mentions cereal boxes telling you to indulge.
Yeah, treats without remorse. It argues that consumerism, often helped by pop psychology, has convinced us that indulgence is good for us, that fulfilling desires is healthy, while thrift is, I don't know, oppressive.
And it worked, didn't it? We became good consumers.
Largely, yes. Buying things we don't strictly need, feeling pressure to get the newest model, shopping is a major pastime, consumer goods mediating relationships.
Even holidays get transformed, Christmas especially.
Memorial Day sales. It seeps into everything. They become festivals of consumption.
And the food market example is powerful, from fearing starvation to battling obesity.
A huge shift. And often, obesity hits poorer communities harder, linked to cheap, processed, high-calorie foods.
Yeah.
The source has that wry line about obesity being a double victory for consumerism.
How so?
First, you buy too much food and overeat. Then you buy diet products, gym memberships, weight loss plans to fix the problem you created by consuming.
Huh. That's cynical, but you can see the logic.
It points out this apparent contradiction. Capitalism tells the rich to save and reinvest profits.
Right, the core principle.
But it tells everyone else to spend, spend, spend. How does that work? The explanation offered is a kind of division of labor.
Okay.
The rich handle the investing part, the rest of us. Our job is to handle the buying part.
So it's like two commandments: invest for the wealthy and buy for the masses.
That's the idea presented, the capitalist-consumerist ethic.
Yeah.
And what's unique, the source argues, is that unlike most ethical systems that demand difficult things, sacrifice, compassion, resisting temptation, this one, people actually do it. The rich mostly keep trying to get richer, and the masses generally keep indulging their desires and buying more stuff. It might be the first ethic in history where the followers actually succeed in doing what's asked.
Wow. That's quite the take. And how do we know we get the promised paradise in return?
Ah, the final provocative thought there. The answer implied is, we've seen it on television. Advertising, media, showing us the happy consuming life.
Right. Okay. So let's try and wrap this up. We dove deep into the Industrial Revolution, seeing it fundamentally as this unlocking of huge amounts of energy and materials.
Through breakthroughs in energy conversion, yeah.
Which led to this explosion in production, totally changed agriculture, changed our relationship with animals, and eventually gave rise to this consumerist ethic that kind of drives the whole system now.
That's a good summary of the journey we took.
And hopefully, for everyone listening, there were some aha moments there. Seeing how a rattling kettle lid could lead to, well, all of this. And realizing the abundance we have now has some really complex, maybe sometimes uncomfortable roots.
Definitely food for thought.
Yeah.
Which leads us to maybe one final thing for listeners to ponder.
Go on.
Given this seemingly endless drive for more production, more consumption, and also our growing scientific understanding of other living beings and ecosystems, what does a genuinely sustainable and ethical future actually look like? How do we balance progress with responsibility?
Wow.
And what role will innovation play going forward?
That's a big question to leave people with. Good one.
Something to mull over.
Okay, so there you have it. Our deep dive into the engines of the Industrial Revolution, pulling together the key threads from our source material. We looked at the energy, the materials, the agricultural shift, the rise of consumerism. I think we've covered the main ground comprehensively.